This is part 7 of a short story about Billy the Kid. It's a tale told in text, remembrances, old photos, and tableaus that Henry McCarty, also known as Kid Antrim, aka William Bonney, aka Billy the Kid, would have been familiar with. To summarize parts 1 through 6, John Tunstall, who was a cattleman and merchant who had employed the kid and been kind to him, was murdered by a corrupt collective of sketchy characters known as the House. The kid took it personally and hard. Others did too. It was the start of the Lincoln County War. The Tunstall-McSween crew of cowboys and ranchers vowed to avenge Tunstall's death. The crew members forged close personal bonds and were ultimately known as the Regulators. Tired of being jerked around by a corrupted legal system in the hands of the House, the Regulators acted in accordance with their own brand of frontier justice. They killed several men involved in Tunstall's death. They gunned down Sheriff Brady and Deputy Hinman in Lincoln. Both men had been involved in some way with Tunstall's murder. On April 4th, they engaged Buckshot Roberts in a shootout at Blazer's Mill and fatally wounded him. Before he died, Buckshot killed Dick Brewer, the captain of the Regulators, and managed to disable 4 of the other Regulators. Frank McNabb, who was the newly appointed captain of the Regulators, was killed by the Seven Rivers Boys on April 29th. Then there was a battle in Lincoln where at least one House fighter was severely injured. In mid-July, another battle was fought in Lincoln, all of the Regulators against all of the House, to try and eliminate the opposing side once and for all. It failed. Both sides still numbered many fighting men. However, the Regulators had lost a key player in their quest for justice. Their avowed leader, Alexander McSween, was killed in the final moments of the battle in his yard just outside his burning house. Some of the fire burning in the boys' hearts died that night too. Now, without their nominal leader, the concept of frontier justice must have seemed less compelling, and some of the boys began to question how much the pursuit of justice mattered to them in the long-term scheme of things. The kid was not one of them. This next part of the kid's story will not follow a chronology of events as in previous videos, but will focus on what daily life must have been like for our legendary outlaw teenager. This part of his story relies very much on the remembrances of the people who knew him, some of them well known through their writings or role in the Lincoln County War, and others who are unknown to the general public, but whose recollections were captured through the Federal Writers Project. By focusing on daily life in the latter part of 19th century New Mexico, it puts the kid and other characters in the kid's story into context. The life of the kid was not in any way glamorous or easy. It was downright hard. And while he managed to feed and clothe himself, buy or trade for guns and cartridges, and occasionally buy some nice things, to a great extent he was dependent on his friends and the hospitality of the New Mexican people. At a very young age, the kid was traveling on his way from east to west. While his exact route is uncertain, he and his family probably left from New York, over to Indiana, down to Kansas, over to Colorado, down to Santa Fe, and finally to Silver City, New Mexico. The traveling was likely by train, at least until Colorado. We can suppose that he and his family did not ride first class on the trains. Third class, also known as emigrant class, is probably how he and his family traveled. It cost about $40 for a transcontinental trip, the lowest fare for the worst accommodations. The cars, fitted with rows of narrow wooden benches, were often coupled to freight cars, and they were constantly shunted aside to make way for the express trains. Third-class travel was probably crowded, noisy, smelly, and monotonous. Still, it was probably better than days and days walking beside a wagon and being subject to all kinds of hazards. Billy's early experiences moving around and not staying in any one place for too long may have accustomed him to a nomadic lifestyle with not too many amenities. Since there were no trains into New Mexico until 1879, the final ride to Santa Fe would have been by wagon, stagecoach, horse, or mule. The kid would have known about traveling the stage from his early days, and later from being transported while he was under arrest. When the little family arrived in New Mexico, they probably did not know that the New Mexico Territory was a hot mess of corruption and criminality where homicides occurred on a regular basis. At that time, the sparsely populated New Mexico Territory accounted for 15% of all homicides in the country. The 1880 homicide rate was 47 times the national average, and gunshot wounds were a leading cause of death. Something to keep in mind about this period of history in New Mexico is that men consumed a lot of alcohol, and guns, necessary for hunting game and to defend against outlaws and the lingering threats from the Apaches, were everywhere. So, to sum it up, not many people in New Mexico, but lots of killings from gunshots. Suffice it to say, there were a lot of guns paired with a lot of alcohol consumption. This could and did result in deadly confrontations. Whiskey was the preferred way to alter your mood, and depending on where you consumed it, was often mixed with other ingredients such as grain alcohol, kerosene, or tobacco juice, or worse. People also drank beer, and depending on location, it was perhaps the safer and better tasting alternative to water. Ice was being used more and more to keep it chilled. Bottled beer was available to the kid as well as home brewed. Saloons could be found in every shape and size, including tents. Many saloons also offered salty snacks and free meals, which might have included items like sandwiches, beans, canned oysters, and some saloons also served wine and cocktails. Of course, saloons were places to drink and gamble, but also for socializing. To get the full flavor of the importance of saloons in 19th century daily life, we have to remember that obviously there was no internet, no phones, computers, CDs, or streaming music. Many people could not read or write, so reading for enjoyment or entertainment was not an option for them. If you've ever lost power for a day or more, you know how much we rely on electricity to provide us with relaxing and enjoyable things to do in our downtime. And as a day without power rolls over into 2 or 3 days without power, I am betting most people would be desperate to go to a public place where there would be other people with news and conversation. So let's just call the saloon a multifunctional institution. Another consideration to keep in mind as you view the images that contain people is that the images taken by tintypers or photographers in the kids' time required that you not move for 10 seconds or more, which is probably the reason no one ever smiled in the images we have from the 19th century. Just try holding the same smile for more than 10 seconds. A notable exception, of course, is the one authenticated tintype that we have of the kid, which shows the kid with a half smile. I wonder if he bet the tintyper that he could hold the smile for 10 seconds. Lucky for us, he would have won the bet. His half smile has come through the ages and will continue to engage us until the end of time. Yes, there were plenty of saloons, and let me just say that from a 21st century perspective, some of those saloons are not pretty. In fact, some look downright disgusting. I don't see any spittoons in that less than immaculate saloon on the right. Even so, there was a certain etiquette observed in most saloons that included buying the guy next to you a drink, and you avoided asking someone their last name. First names were just fine for socializing in a saloon. Curiosity could get you hurt or worse. There were nicer saloons too. This one in Socorro, New Mexico looks more upscale, and I think I see a coffee pot with coffee cups. We can safely assume the kid would have frequented a lot of saloons, not necessarily to drink, but to gamble and maybe even to take advantage of the complimentary food served in many saloons. Gambling was a popular entertainment and perfectly enabled by the barroom venue. But not all gambling took place in a saloon. It happened anywhere there were willing participants who had something to wager. Billy had excellent gambling skills and supplemented his other extracurricular activities by dealing Monte and faro. Gambling often overlapped with other activities that were enjoyable and competitive, like games and contests. It was the 19th century way to mix business with pleasure, and games and competitions were what you did in your leisure time, just to have fun. Dr. Henry Hoyt observed that in the rear of a Tascosa store there was a graveyard of empty beer bottles, and one of the sports of the cowboys was to set up 6 in a row and at a range of 50 yards shoot for the drinks with their .45s. Here, Billy was a champion. He could pull his gun and demolish the 6 bottles in half the time of anyone else. He was also a marvelous shot with a Winchester. I've not found a record of the kid reaching for chickens, but Lily Casey said he was very proud of his ability to pick up a handkerchief or other object from the ground while riding at a run. The kid loved contests, gambling, and had a passion for singing and dancing. So did the Hispanic people. One of the old-timers interviewed as part of the WPA tells us the dances of old were a place to go and enjoy the evening, not a place to get drunk. A girl would not dance with a drunk man. He says the kid was welcomed by all at the dances. He was a good dancer and had nice manners and always respected everyone. Paulita Maxwell, who was reputed to be Billy's best girl, said the kid was always smiling and good-natured and very polite and danced remarkably well, and the little Mexican beauties made eyes at him from behind their fans and used all their feminine charms to capture him and were very vain of his attentions. These ladies had the kind of beauty that you associate with castanets and lattice balconies and ancient courtyards filled with the perfume of oleander. They were very graceful dancers. We had very good music, generally 6 pieces. You might prepare for your shooting contest or a fandango the same way, by downing a good strong cup of coffee. Coffee, it was as important then as it is now. Everyone drank coffee to wake up, stay awake, keep warm, and to socialize. It was an essential beverage for cowboys out on the range, and due to the way it was prepared by boiling ground roasted coffee beans, it may have been a safer alternative to water. In the first part of the 1870s, Arbuckle's Coffee Company had created a roasted coffee bean with an egg white and sugar coating that preserved the bean, and they sold it in convenient 1-pound bags. Before Arbuckle's innovation, green coffee beans had to be roasted in a pan without being burned. The kid seems to have enjoyed a good brew as well. The young lad Auburn was not just trying to placate a gang of outlaws. He was expressing the propriety of the Hispanic people. Hospitality in the kid's part of New Mexico was an intrinsic part of the culture, and the New Mexicans provided more than just coffee. Charles Rourke tells us that in the early days, everyone was welcome to chuck and no questions asked. John Chisholm's ranch dispensed the same kind of hospitality, where it was said that the stranger was as free as the invited guest to bed and board for as long as he wanted to stay, and no money or questions asked. Indeed, after the deaths of Tunstall and McSween, the hospitality of the New Mexican people seems to have been a major source of support for the kid. After all, he was under indictment for the murder of Sheriff Brady and Buckshot Roberts, and could not stay for long enough periods of time in one place for fear of capture. It made for a nomadic way of life, which he was already accustomed to from his early experiences traveling across the country and his time spent in Arizona. Generosity was part of his nature, so it is likely he returned in kind the hospitality that was extended to him. The food the kid enjoyed would have included items from a traditional Hispanic diet, depending on availability and the resources of his host. When he was working and out on the range hustling and rustling, the food choices would be restricted to what could be carried in a saddlebag or game. He also spent time on the range helping his Hispanic friends, many of whom were sheep herders, and where only the bare necessities were available. The migratory Hispano sheep camp generally consisted of a little bedding, a frying pan, a coffee pot, plates, a pot in which to boil mutton, antelope, or rabbit with chili pods, a couple of spoons, and some butcher knives. With the exception of the McSween House and Chisholm's Ranch, the homes of most of his hosts would have been mostly simple adobe structures. The basic building unit was a single room with one exterior door, sometimes a window, and a small adobe fireplace in the corner. The room provided space for cooking, sleeping, and the entire range of family activities. As families increased in size, other similar units, each with its own exterior door, were added next to the original one. At one point, the kid had a room at Fort Sumner, which may have looked like the rooms shown here. Billy later told Meadows that Tom Cooper, Charlie Beaudry, Tom Folliard, and Billy Wilson were among the men there. Which brings us to a discussion of what the kid may have packed in his pack and saddlebags when he wasn't in his room and he was out and about on business. We can suppose that what he packed probably depended on where he was going, what route he was taking to get there, how long he was going to be in the saddle, and what his business was. Sagamite, fried bread, and pine nuts would have been easy to carry. Chocolate was available, but I doubt it would have been a good thing to carry in a saddlebag in the summer. And we can't forget some high-calorie munchies for the horses. They would have found grass on the ground, but horses need grains like oats or corn if they are going to work hard. The kid was known to be good to his horses, so maybe he packed some wholesome oats to support his transportation. You know, just in case he needed to skedaddle like a bat out of hell. It must have been an art to pack a blanket roll, where to put your matches, in your saddlebag, the pack, or pocket. A hoof pick must have been essential. Do you carry an extra horseshoe and shoe puller? Having a horse with a loose shoe or no shoe is a little bit like having a flat tire. The balance of the horse is impaired and predisposes it to injury. Hobbles, which are leather strap-like devices that go around the lower part of the horse's legs to keep a horse from wandering off if there isn't a good place to tie him, those were probably best in a saddlebag. Extra buckles and pieces of leather are good to have on hand. A rifle in a scabbard was also an essential item to have ready to go. A canteen of water and, of course, the cherished coffee cup buckled on somewhere. The point is that the kid would have spent time before each journey inspecting, cleaning tack, and packing. He is known to have spent hours and hours cleaning his firearms, so it seems reasonable to believe that he was as meticulous in his pre-journey preparations. The kid spent a lot of time out on the range, hustling and rustling. Sleeping would have been on the ground unless he was at one of his hideouts. Even then, still probably on the ground, but under a roof. The kid was rustling right about the time barbed wire was coming into common use. So there were still boundless areas of open range in New Mexico where cattle from independently owned herds intermingled with other herds. Rustling usually involved more than one activity. A rustler and his team had to know the land. For example, where water could be found, where cattle could be driven without being spotted, and where there was grazing along the way. Rustlers had to be good riders, good at roping and cutting stock out of a herd, and they had to know the brands that cattle carried and how to brand and rebrand. And they had to have a place to corral them for branding and rebranding, and to hold them until a sale was finalized. A rustler would have contacts and willing buyers who would be ready to accept a bill of sale for stock of uncertain ownership. And of course, to be able to tolerate the rough conditions of living out on the range: heat, cold, dust, snakes, hygienic challenges, and depending on the location, threats from the Apache. The kid had all these traits, along with a charismatic personality. And I can't help but think that Billy must have been proud of the hideaway he built at Coyote Springs, and that before going to bed at night, he might have stared up at the stars illuminating the night sky and been filled with a profound sense of wonder. Hideouts that had a structure had to be built by someone, probably by himself and just a few trusted people. So we might assume that he spent time building and working around his hideout, making corrals, perhaps even rebranding livestock. It would have been a good place to break a horse, store supplies, do laundry, have a friend cut your hair, and relax with a beer after a hard day's work. It's worth noting that in the kids' time, everything took longer to do. For instance, basic hygiene required hauling water from somewhere. If you were lucky, you would have a well nearby. If not, it would be a spring or river, probably some distance away. Heating the water would have required a fire, either in a wood stove or fireplace or outdoor open fire. Doing laundry meant hauling water and then sorting darks and lights because colors were not color fast in those days. Soaking clothes overnight, washing by hand using a washboard or paddle, rinsing by hand, wringing out, hanging the laundry on a line or on vegetation, starching certain items, and ironing, using an iron that needed a fire to get hot. It meant a lot of water hauling or going right to a river to do the whole process. Billy's mother had been a laundress, so it is likely he very much valued clean clothing and would have known the best way to do it. Like today, the items of clothing washed most often would have been undergarments, whose purpose was to protect outer clothing from body oils and sweat. Likely socks, shirts, drawers, bandanas, possibly bandages, collars, and cuffs. And all those buttons must have been challenging. When the kid was staying in Fort Sumner, his close friend, Delovina Maxwell, might have helped him with his laundry. Or, if there was a laundry and he had money, he might have taken his clothing to be cleaned. That must have been a relief. George Coe, one of the kids' regulator friends, noted that if there was a clean shirt in town, it was on Billy's back. So another snippet of information that the kid valued clean clothes. We can make an informed guess about the clothing he would have worn around the hideout. It would have been work clothing. And we know what work clothes he might have preferred because we have an authenticated tintype of him taken in Fort Sumner around 1880. A felt hat, a bandana, ragged and faded, that was worn on the range to keep from inhaling dust and to protect the face from the sun. A shirt, likely suspenders, also called braces, hidden under the vest. An old vest, also called a waistcoat, that provided pockets, warmth in winter, and hides the braces. An oversized sweater for flexibility and warmth. Wool pants, a gun belt for guns and cartridges, not for holding up pants. Belt loops on trousers were not worn until much later in the century. Well-worn boots with heels to protect the pant leg from wear and tear from the saddle, and to help prevent the foot from slipping out through the stirrup. Boots also shield the leg from brambles and snakes. We also know from the recollections of people that knew him that when he was not working, he was a meticulous dresser. Sally Chisholm remembers that as far as dress was concerned, he always looked as if he had just stepped out of a bandbox. In broad-brimmed white hat, dark coat and vest, gray trousers worn over his boots, a gray flannel shirt, and black four-in-hand tie. So when he wasn't working, like all of us today, he would have spent time grooming to look his best, especially if he was going to a dance. There were plenty of buttons to open and close on outer garments as well. Zippers were not in everyday use until the 20th century. Flies were buttoned. There was not a lot of choice on the length of shirt sleeves, so sleeve garters were used to keep the sleeves from slipping down. And if it were me, since shirts were pullover, I would be buying my shirts a size too big to help get it over my arms and head. It is unlikely that blue denim jeans were worn during the kids' time, although the fabric itself was around in the 1870s. Sources differ on when denim jeans, as we know them, were introduced by Levi Strauss. Quoting Frank Clifford now, who was a cowboy drifter who knew the kid and who wrote a memoir about his experiences in the Wild West, said that neither did they wear blue denim pants, although I understand that those later became very popular among the boys and were called Levi's. In my time, we wore just flat woven wool or cotton pants. This was during the late 70s, while I was working on the Staked Plains and roving here and there. End of quote. Keeping clean was a challenge in the Old West. Hauling the water was labor-intensive and the soaps were harsh. Lice were a constant problem, especially for people living together in cramped spaces or frequenting stand-up bars. Once, when the kid offered to let John Meadows use his room, John said that he could not because he was loaded with lice. The kid nonchalantly replied, "Heck, I've had 1,000,000 on me." Frank Clifford tells us that for their hair, the Mexican women used soapweed. And if Frank knew about soapweed and had his hair washed, the kid most likely did too. In the kids' time and place, hygiene in general involved some awkward practices. For example, the outhouse was the standard way to deal with bodily wastes. Outhouses were small sheds that covered a hole in the ground that received excreta. They likely would have been stocked with corn cobs, straw, leaves, and other organics to deal with the consequences of using the outhouse. They were smelly, attracted insects, and were a breeding ground for disease. Toilet tissue started being marketed in 1859 in the United States. It was about 50 cents for 500 flat sheets. A rough price conversion to 1880 prices means that 500 sheets would cost about $15. So, the medicated paper was probably not in general use in New Mexico. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here and speculate that it was probably not in use at any of the kids' hideouts. Heck, there was probably not even an outhouse at a hideout. That said, it's a good time for a change of topic. William Bonney was literate. He could read and write English, spoke Spanish, and it is said he spoke some Gaelic too. Anthony Connor, a boyhood friend of the kid, remembers that Billy scarcely would have his dishes washed until he would be sprawled out somewhere reading a book. Connor says that he took to reading the Police Gazette and dime novels. The kid had neat penmanship and wrote several letters to Governor Wallace asking him to honor his promise to pardon him. And he is also known to have written to Sally Chisholm. So we know he spent some of his free time reading and writing. Billy was known to care about his horses. Frank Coe said he was a fine horseman, quick and always in the lead. At the same time, he was kind to his horses and could save them and have them ready and fresh when he needed to make a dash. Another friend of Billy's, Francisco Gomez, said that Billy rode a big, fast roan horse. And when his horse was out in the pasture, Billy would go to the gate and whistle, and the horse would come up to the gate to him. That horse would follow Billy and mind him like a dog. Working with his horses, grooming and training them was another way the kid spent his time. The kid was well known for his ability to shoot fast and accurately with both a rifle and a revolver. He was also known for his steady nerve and accuracy under pressure. Frank Coe said that he had a wonderful presence of mind. The tighter the place, the more he showed his cool nerve and quick brain. He said that the kid spent all his spare time cleaning his six-shooter and practicing shooting. He could take 2 6-shooters, loaded and cocked, one in each hand, and twirl one in one direction and the other in the other direction. Frank Clifford, when writing about the kind of guns preferred by the people who carried guns, said that for rifles, the Winchester .44 carbine would be the saddle gun if one was carried at all. The change from the .45 to the .44 revolver, both Colts, came in the late 70s. We all changed as soon as possible because the same cartridge fit both the Winchester .44 rifle and the Colt .44 revolver. Then we had to carry only one belt full of cartridges for the 2 guns. And then there was love, romance, and passion. The kid had a reputation for really liking the ladies, and the ladies liked him. Tom Folliard was known to have held his horse while he courted his señoritas, sometimes for the whole night. It's nice to know he had this little extra bit of joy in his short life. Hustlin', rustlin', getting gussied up, singing, dancing, and courting, reading, writing, gambling, guns, contests, an occasional killing, caring for his horses, minding his cattle, making enemies, and being a friend to his friends and to the Hispanic people. Such was the daily life of Billy the Kid.